All right. I think I'm live. I think everything is working, hopefully. Okay. Tonight, got a couple things. First of all, um, I'll start by saying I'm a little bit nervous. I am attempting tonight to go live for the first time on two platforms at once. I've not done this before. And so this has been had me a little bit anxious. I talk a lot about feelings. Tonight, I'm experiencing anxiety, a little bit of fear, a little bit of stress. I've been doing Let's Talk Recovery Live on Facebook for quite a while now. And tonight, for the very first time, I'm attempting to stream on Facebook and on YouTube. Hey, I see guys checking in here on YouTube. You are my first viewers ever on YouTube. I want you to know that. And so that's pretty exciting for me. And yeah, so I'm trying to do this live on two platforms. A number of people that I know, a number of my clients, don't use Facebook or social media. And I've been recording this on Facebook and then posting the video on YouTube, but I'm attempting to go live on both platforms so that more people will have an opportunity to interact live here in the comments section. And so, what I will say up front as we get started, whether you're on YouTube or whether you're on Facebook, you're not going to be able to see each other there. And so if you comment on one of those platforms, the other platform can't see your comment. But as I'm talking tonight, if you have comments or you have questions, you can feel free to put those in the chat. And if I get a chance, I will cover those and we'll go to those. Now, as we're getting started tonight, I want to do a little bit of a recap. The past 2 weeks, what we've been talking about is grief. 2 weeks ago, we talked about grief and the idea that grief can lead us into addiction and into unhealthy behavior. And we talked about a definition of grief. A lot of people, when we think about grief, we immediately think about death and loss through a death. But what we talked about is that grief can be loss of any kind. It can be loss of a loved one, loss of a job, loss of a relationship and a marriage. It can be loss of a pet that we've had for years. Anything that we experience as loss creates grief inside of us, and grief is a feeling. And grief carries with it a sense of pain, a sense of loneliness. And and so we laid out a definition and we talked about how that grief, in that grief, that as a means of escape rather than processing, that can lead us into active addiction, whether that be drugs, alcohol, pornography, sexual behavior. It can be gaming. I know many people that whenever they experience grief and pain, they game all night. They look for ways to make themselves busy in order to avoid feelings. And maybe you've heard people say that. I've joked about that. People say, "How you doing?" Well, I'm staying so busy, I don't have time to get into trouble. And some of us use that busyness as an escape of pain, as an escape of grief. And that's not a healthy move because even busyness will create fatigue, we'll wear ourselves out, and eventually we'll collapse or we'll act out in some way. And so we've talked about grief and loss. We've talked about how that can lead into addiction. Last week, we talked about grief in recovery. And grief in recovery, that would be things like that internal loss, that idea that in our addiction, we've had coping tools that even though they may be unhealthy, even though they may have caused us pain and may have caused us issues, caused us loss, those coping mechanisms were the only things that we had. And so, as we enter into recovery, all of a sudden those coping mechanisms are gone. I had a gentleman tell me once he was in recovery for alcohol addiction. And he told me, he said, as I began to work with my sponsor and attend meetings and try to get my drinking under control, he said, I remember just going off on my sponsor. And he said, I was working the steps and I was learning about resentment and making amends and giving up resentment and giving up anger. And he said, I told my sponsor, if I give all these things up, if I give up my resentment and I give up my bitterness and I give up my anger, then who the hell am I? I don't even know who I am anymore. That's the only me that I've known. And that is a form of grief, a form of loss. It's a loss of identity, a loss of dreams, a loss of coping mechanisms. So, what we're going to talk about tonight, is the question becomes, once I'm feeling all this, and that's one of the biggest struggles that most of us have as we enter into recovery, is we have spent years, maybe the majority of our life, running from feelings. All of a sudden, we're beginning to feel our feelings, and our feelings aren't comfortable. That's usually because we've never been taught what to do with them. We've never been taught how to process pain and anger and fear and loneliness, shame, guilt. We don't know what to do with them. And so all of a sudden, we're experiencing these feelings, and the question becomes, now that I'm feeling all of this, what do I actually do with it? I'm sitting here and it's miserable to sit in all these feelings when I don't know what to do with them. So, what do I do with it? We don't know what to do with our pain. We don't know what to do with our grief. And tonight, we're going to talk about a word that, if you're not a Christian, if you've not been in church, you may never have heard this word before. But for most of us, even if we grew up in the church, even if we grew up and have lived most of our lives as a Christian, most of us really don't know what this word means. And that word that we're going to talk about tonight is lament. Lament. That's a word with me growing up in the church that I heard for years. We've got a whole book in the Bible called Lamentations. I never had any idea what lament was. And we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about that tonight. So, the problem, what do we do with our pain? What do we do with our feelings? Most of us have never been taught how to process grief. Some of the most common responses that we have for grief and pain are things like escape. That's where addiction comes in, or distraction, trying to keep ourselves so busy that we don't have time to get into trouble. Distraction never works any more than addiction does. Distraction eventually wears us out and we collapse anyway. So we might learn to escape. We turn to addiction. We learn to suppress. We learn to shut down emotionally. We learn to numb out internally. I've shared before in my story that uh, when I was young, I learned to shut down emotionally, just to keep everybody at arm's length and to not feel anything. That was my goal in life. Just don't feel. If I can't feel, I can't be hurt. So we suppress or we learn to respond with an attempt to control that stems from anger and rigidity. And honestly, control almost always stems from fear. And we might touch on that a little bit. Guys really struggle with the idea of fear. That's a feeling that we don't ever want to admit, that we don't ever want to own. None of us like to admit that we're afraid. Um, and so, but control, if I can control the situation, if I can control the people that are around me, then maybe I can control my feelings and my pain. Or a last one that I'll touch on here is a common response to pain and to grief is performance, an attempt to perform. We try to be the best. Some of us become the clown. We entertain the family. We're out to make everybody laugh. We're out to make everybody else feel happy. And internally, we're miserable. And we have all kinds of examples in society of that kind of response, performance, and how that never works. An example, I was all my life, I was a big fan of Robin Williams. I remember the old days of Mork and Mindy. And some of you are too young to remember that TV show, but Robin Williams was hilarious. And his entire life, he was always the center of attention. He always seemed to be confident. He always seemed to be content. He always seemed to be happy. But what we ended up learning later is that he struggled his entire life with a lack of self-worth and self-value. He struggled with depression. And ultimately, it resulted in him taking his own life. Performance. We turn to performance to avoid our pain and to run from our grief. Now, here's what I want you to hear tonight. This is something that you need to remember. If we don't know how to process our pain, we will find a way to escape from it. We will. And that escape will come through some of these routes that I've just mentioned. It may come through addiction. It may come through suppression and shutting down emotionally. It may come through performance. Ultimately, it may come through us deciding to end it all. And I don't want that for anybody. I don't want any of these things for anybody. We have the ability to learn to process our feelings and our grief. And we're going to talk about that tonight. A phrase that I use all the time, if you have watched these videos very much, is that behind every behavior is a feeling, and behind every feeling is a need. That idea that these behaviors, the addiction, suppressing our feelings, that's a way that a lot of us turn. That's a coping mechanism that many of us turn to. Maybe you can relate to this. I used to, man, I struggled with anger and control and um, trying to suppress my feelings. Didn't always work very well. Um, because here's the problem: when we suppress our feelings, it's like taking that can of soda and just shaking it like crazy. And that pressure begins to build inside until ultimately, at some point, it explodes and it comes out. So, I want to tie this into our relapse cycle, and a basic, simple relapse cycle that we can look at and that we can tie this into is the idea of we experience pain, we experience grief, we don't have an outlet, we don't know what to do with it, and that erupts in an unhealthy behavior. Now, we can focus on the behavior, we can spend all of our time chasing the behavior, but that's like chasing a symptom. That's like my example of we have a headache that's there nonstop, 24/7. It's intense. And so we pop Advil all day, every day. And then a year or two down the road, we die and it's discovered we had a brain tumor. But we were chasing the symptom and never bothered to find out what the root cause of the problem was. And that's the way that we work in our addictions. For many of us, we chase behaviors. We chase behaviors and we never get back to the root cause that's causing what's driving us to the behavior. So let me turn. I said we were going to talk about lament, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So let me give a simple, clear definition of lament. And I'll start with grief and lament. Grief is what we feel when we lose something that had value for us. Lament simply is what do we do with that grief? What do we do with that grief when we experience that pain of loss? Now, here's the thing. What we do, lament, what we do with that grief, what I'm not talking about is that we don't look to sit around and complain. We don't look for a quick fix. Most of us that have struggled with addiction, I've shared before, when I got out of prison, I had 2 years, no acting out, no nothing. And I thought I was cured. I thought, man, I have set a new world speed record for recovery. And I think all of us are chasing that when we enter into recovery, a new world speed record. Recovery never takes place fast. We're not looking, in lament, we're not looking for a quick fix. We're not looking for that magic button on the wall. We're looking to process. We're not rushing to gratitude. That idea of rushing to gratitude, that would include things. Some of the statements that I hear sometimes, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a Christian. I was a longtime pastor. I was in the ministry for over 20 years. One of the things in church and with Christians that aggravates me intensely is when people make statements like, well, brother, God's got a plan in everything. Everything happens for a reason. And I got to tell you, I guess in a spiritual, super spiritualized way, there might be some truth to that. But somebody loses a child. I don't care who you are. You're not going to convince me that God had a reason for taking that child at an early age. There's not anything that you can say to a parent that's lost a child that's going to take away that pain and make them say, oh, I'm glad this happened. And so here's what lament is. Lament, three things here. Lament. Lament is stopping and taking the time to name the feeling. Sorry there, need a drink. My throat's dry. Lament is pausing to take the time to name our feelings. Now, here's what I want you to hear and understand. Naming our feelings and naming what we're experiencing is important for healing. And it actually is an important thing for our relationship with God if we are spiritual people. Being able to name what we're feeling. I've shared this multiple times. The whole book of Job. We see the book of Psalms. All through the book of Psalms, people are vomiting their emotions. They're experiencing pain and heartache, and they're just pouring that out. There's one place I always refer to that where David in Psalms, he's being chased. People are trying to kill him. And David is praying to God, and what he prays is, God, will you take the children of these people that are chasing me and beat their brains out on the rocks? Now, that's a pretty harsh statement. That's a pretty emotional statement, but that's a pretty honest statement. When we look at the book of Job, all through the book of Job, Job makes some statements that a lot of Christians struggle with. Job is looking at the loss of his family, the loss of all of his wealth, all of his belongings. All that Job has left in life is three friends that are trying to tell him that he did something wrong and brought this on himself. And he has a wife. Do you remember? His wife makes one statement in the book of Job. Do you remember what it was? It was something to the effect of, why don't you quit whining and crying and curse God and die? That's his advice from his wife. And Job spends the majority of the book of Job speaking to God and telling God, this isn't fair. This isn't right. I didn't deserve this. In fact, Job makes a statement multiple times to his friends. He says, if God were here, I'd set him straight. I would explain to him why what he's doing and why what's happening is wrong. That's pain and that's grief crying out from a man's heart. That's honesty. And I say that's honesty because at the end of the book of Job, God eventually appears and speaks. And Job makes a statement, or not Job, but God makes a statement that's pretty amazing. God speaks and he says, my servant Job is the only one who has spoken the truth about me. Now, what was Job saying again? He was saying this isn't right, and this isn't fair. And if God were here, I'd tell him why it's not right and why it's not fair. Now, when God made his statement, Job's the only one that spoke the truth about me. Was he saying that he's not fair? Was he saying that he's not just? I don't believe that. I believe that what God was saying is Job spoke the truth because he was honest about what he was feeling and what he was experiencing. Honest about what he was feeling and what he was experiencing. Over the years in ministry, and I have a friend, Rob Shetler. Some of you know Rob. I have a friend, Rob Shetler. Rob was a pastor for many years. He was also a hospice chaplain and a hospital chaplain. And Rob shares regularly about how, in his work as a hospice chaplain and a hospital chaplain, he would talk with people who were on their deathbeds and he would talk with their families. And they would share, this just isn't right. Just isn't fair. I'm so angry. Sometimes they would share, I'm angry with God. And Rob told me, he said, I would ask them, have you told God that? Have you been honest with God about what you're feeling? And almost always the response was, well, no, I can't talk like that to God. But they were sitting there talking to Rob about that. Do you not think God hears that? We have thoughts like that. We say them in our heads. Do we not believe that God knows what we're thinking and what's going on in our hearts? And God told Job and his friends, Job is the only one who spoke the truth. He was honest about what he was feeling. And I want to tell you, when you're experiencing grief, when life is hard, when things don't seem fair and don't seem right, you've lost a family member to death. You've lost a relationship or a marriage. I've shared with you guys, I have a daughter that has it's been years. It's been 15, 16 years since I got out of prison. And my youngest daughter has very little to do with me. She didn't speak to me at all for years. Now, when we see each other, she does speak, but it's very limited, very short. And she doesn't want me reaching out to her. And I got to tell you, that's painful and that hurts. God is big enough to handle my honesty about that. And I believe he desires for us to be honest about what we're experiencing. He wants us to be honest about what we feel. And so lament is naming the feeling, it's acknowledging the need. I have a need for connection. I have a need for community. It may be I have a need for a house and a place to live. It may be I have needs for groceries. I don't have anything to eat today. We have to acknowledge our need. If you go to church, I'm going to go back to that. And I'm not, man, I love the church. I've attended the same church ever since I got out of prison. I love my church. But if you go to church, as you walk through the door, somebody always says, hey, brother, how are you doing today? And how do we always respond? Oh, I'm good. I'm fine. A lot of times I'm not. We need to acknowledge the need. We need to acknowledge the pain. We need to live in honesty. And we need to bring those feelings and that acknowledgement of need into relationship and into the light in our lives. I mentioned earlier, we have an entire book in the Bible called Lamentations. A lot of people have never read that book. I'll tell you what, I had over 20 years in ministry and I've never had anybody tell me Lamentations is my favorite book of the Bible. For those of you that are here, for any of you, is Lamentations your favorite book of the Bible? Have you even read it? Here's Lamentations. Lamentations, most scholars agree that it was written by Jeremiah, and it was written in the aftermath of tremendous devastation. Jeremiah had spent something like 40 years prophesying to the nation of Israel, if you don't get your act together, if you don't come back to God, an invading army is going to come in and they're going to destroy this city, Jerusalem. That's where Jeremiah was at. They're going to destroy this city and they're going to carry you off into exile. And the people hated Jeremiah because of his message. At one point, they took Jeremiah, tied him up, and threw him into a well to leave him there. And it was a foreigner that came by and heard him crying out from inside the well and pulled him out and saved his life. And so Jeremiah has spent 40 years preaching to these people, asking them to pull things together, to do what's right, to serve God, and they don't listen. And then the army invades, they come in, they destroy the wall around Jerusalem, they destroy the temple. This is Solomon's temple, the temple that Solomon built. They destroy the temple. They burn everything in the city that's burnable. And then they carry all the wealthy, all the intelligent, all the royalty, they carry them off into exile. And what did they do with Jeremiah? Jeremiah has just spent his entire life trying to keep this from happening. And when that army destroys everything and leaves, they leave Jeremiah there in the city that he loves, in the midst of all that destruction and devastation. They leave him there to witness that. And that's where Lamentations is written, in the middle of all that destruction, all that death, all that devastation. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. His heart's broken. The book of Lamentations is raw, it's emotional, but most importantly, it's honest. It's honest. And the book of Lamentations openly questions God. Where are you at? How could you have done this? How could this be just? How could this be right? Those questions are asked, and they're asked openly and repeatedly and loudly. And the book doesn't call for a rush to resolution, for a rush to make everything right. Now, here's a couple points, 3 points that I want to make based on that book of Lamentations. In the book of Lamentations, Jeremiah, if he's the author, he does not attempt in any way to hide his pain from God. And I want to challenge you. Are you brave enough? Do you actively work to present your pain and your emotions and your feelings to God? And I would challenge you even to present them to somebody else. I believe we need to take that pain and we need to take that hurt. We need to take it to God and we need to share it with others. We don't need to share it with everybody. It's not safe for us to share it with everybody. But we have to share it with somebody. I know some of you that are here are a part of an organization called Samson Society. And that's one of the things that we find there. Some of you attend group meetings, AA, SA, NA. You attend these meetings. One of the things that I find in these meetings that brings me comfort and peace is that I can share my pain. I can share my struggle and my experience. And I watch somebody across a table, or I watch somebody on a screen that as I'm sharing my pain and my struggle, I see that person across the room, across the table on that screen begin to nod their heads. And I know, I believe that they understand what I'm talking about. They maybe haven't been through the exact same thing. They maybe haven't experienced everything in exactly the same way that I have, but they understand my pain and they understand my struggle. Yeah, yeah. I see you there, man. I think many times we struggle with sharing our feelings with God. Here's one of the things that we struggle with. I want to speak to a comment here for a minute. Um, you guys have your screen names on here, and I'll be honest, I know who some of you are, and I don't know who some of you are. And so, but somebody said, I often don't share my pain with the Father. I did once after the death of a beloved friend, and I felt guilty being angry with God. Many of us have learned in life, we've learned through experience and through interaction with family members or with friends or with others, we've learned through our interactions with other people that being open and honest about our feelings are not safe. We've learned that. And we're afraid to do that now because of what we've experienced and what we felt there in the past. I grew up in a home where it wasn't safe to share my feelings. I grew up in one of those homes, maybe you can relate to this. Did you grow up in one of those homes where maybe your dad said something like, if you cry, I'll give you something to cry about? And what does that teach us? That teaches us that it's not safe to be honest about our feelings. Or I'll tell you about a personal pet peeve of mine. And I got to be honest, this is something that I did with my kids when I was young, when they were young. And it was a mistake. Today in our society, here's the thing, nobody's born knowing how to process and how to handle feelings. No child is born knowing what to do with fear or anger or shame or sadness or loneliness. We learn what to do with those things through observing our caregivers, our parents, the people that we're close to. That's why if mom and dad didn't express feelings, odds are this isn't going to be an every case situation, but odds are if we grew up in a home where mom and dad never expressed emotion and feeling, then we don't express emotion and feeling. We mimic what we saw practiced in front of us, usually. There's never a one size fits all statement, but that's usually the case. Children get angry and they have a meltdown, and we don't pause to tell them what your feelings anger. And it's okay to be angry, but it's how we respond to anger. It's what we do with that anger. In fact, the Bible says, be angry and sin not. And so a child gets angry, and I did this when my children were young. A child gets angry, and we tell them, you go to your room and you stay there until you get this under control. The problem is that child doesn't know how to get that anger under control. and they go to their room and maybe they throw something and they stomp around. Maybe they curl up on their bed and they cry for a little while. And what they learn is when I'm angry, suppress it, bottle it up, hold it inside. It's not safe to let it out and to let people know. And then we grow up to be adults who bottle it up and then explode. God invites us to be honest and real. Honest and real. So the book of Lamentations, we got all kinds. I'll tell you, on Facebook, I wasn't used to all these comments, man. I'm liking these comments. I'm going to have to get used to reading comments while I'm talking. I'm liking this. We need those places. We don't need to be open with everybody about our feelings. That's not safe. There are people that are not safe to be open and honest with. We don't need to be honest with everybody, but we do need to be honest with somebody. We need to have at least one person in our life where we can be open and honest. And so the book of Lamentations was written in the aftermath of devastation. The book of Lamentations is raw, it's emotional, and it's honest. The author of Lamentations openly questions God and what's happening. And it doesn't rush for resolution. It doesn't rush to fix things. Yeah, I like that, Richard. God hears what we say to him. But a lot of times our issue is hearing what he's saying to us. I like that. So some of the key things that we can take away from the book of Lamentations is that the writer did not hide their pain from God. And we don't need to hide our pain. It's the same message that comes from Job, the same message that comes in many of the Psalms. Honesty about our feelings and our emotions. They didn't try to clean it up before they came to God with it. A lot of us have this idea that before we come to God, we have to get it together. God doesn't expect us to get it together first. He gives us permission to come to him while it's still raw, while it's still painful. And the third thing that we can take away, and this is an important one, is the idea that pain and trust can coexist at the same time. God, I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand what you're doing. This does not seem fair. It doesn't seem just. It doesn't seem right. But I'm going to do my best to trust that you're in control and that you love me and that you desire the best for me. Pain and trust can coexist. That's an important lesson for us to learn with emotions in general. We can experience emotions that seem to be diametrically opposed all at the same time. Feels awkward, feels confusing, but it's very possible. Very possible. All right. So why does lament, why is it important in recovery? Why does it matter in recovery? Here's what we run into. Without lament, without honesty about our emotions and our feelings, without being able to go to God and to another brother or a sister with our pain, with our grief, with our suffering. Without lament, grief turns into relapse. When we experience pain and we don't process it, we don't deal with it, we don't connect to someone else to be able to share and process. Ultimately, we return to old coping mechanisms. We return to a drink. We return to a pill. We return to sexual behavior, pornography, acting out in unhealthy ways. Or without lament, we turn to anger and we lash out at the people around us. There's a gentleman that I know that for years struggled with alcohol, and he now is probably going on better than 10 years since the last time he had a drink. And to be honest with you, he gets on my nerves a lot. I used to work with this guy, and he used to get in people's face. He'd get in my face. Man, you guys are losers. You guys have to have meetings. You have to have a sponsor. You have to have somebody to talk to. I got sober with willpower. I did it all by myself just because I made a decision to stop. And you know what? He did stop drinking. He was a nasty alcoholic for years. And he got up one day and he stopped drinking. He hasn't had a drink again. And it has been over a decade. But in that, he's not living in sobriety. He turned to anger and to bitterness and to resentment. In fact, his wife, he was married, he had children, and his wife stayed with him the entire time that he was drinking. But when he quit drinking, he became angry and he became violent and abusive, and his wife divorced him and left him. His children are all grown, and today none of them speak to him. None of them have anything to do with him. So, what am I saying here? Is that without lament, without processing our pain and our grief, without processing that, even if we don't go back to our original coping mechanism, we find another unhealthy coping mechanism. In his case, it was anger, bitterness, and resentment. He doesn't drink, but he has no friends and no community. He lives in isolation, and he continues to live in emotional and mental pain. Yeah. We move sometimes to isolation, or we choose to shut down emotionally. With lament, when we're able to take that pain, when we're able to go to God with it, when we're able to go to a friend or a group or someone else and process and work through that pain, then that pain is processed instead of avoided. We're able to bring that pain out. We're able to recognize that loss. That doesn't mean that we never feel the pain again. I have family members that have been gone for decades, and there are times when I miss them. But because I've been able to process that pain, because I've been able to take that pain to God, I'm able to talk through that pain and that suffering with other people who are able to express empathy, to share empathy. Because of that, that loss is still present. But as I experience that, it allows me to recognize how important they were to me, how much I valued them, and to be able to see the role that they played in making me the person that I am today. Yeah. With lament, connection is maintained because, again, we're practicing connection with God. We go to God with our pain and with our sorrow. And here's the thing, here's something you need to know. Grief is pain about anything that we've lost that we value. Here's where some of us will get into trouble. We all recognize that we experience grief when we lose a loved one. My addiction exploded after my divorce. I went through a divorce. I was already emotionally shut down. One of the primary reasons for my divorce is I was not able and willing to express my emotions and my feelings to my wife. I got to be honest with you. I've never loved anybody like I loved my wife. I just never showed her that. I never demonstrated that to her. I was shut down emotionally, and that played a major role in my divorce. And then after that divorce, I didn't know what to do with that pain. I didn't know what to do with that grief, and I bottled it up. And my sex addiction exploded. It exploded. And I began to act out. And I isolated. And I was never able to begin to experience freedom until I was able to see my need for community. If we don't learn how to lament, we go back to what helps us, to what helped us to avoid the pain, or we find something new to help us hide, to help us run. In my divorce, I didn't know who I was. All I had ever wanted was to get married and have kids, grow old, sitting in the porch swing with my wife, with grandkids playing around our feet. You know what? I didn't communicate that to her. I was shut down emotionally. In our addiction, in our unhealthy response to pain and grief, we don't know how to handle our stress. We don't talk it over with somebody else. We don't share the pain with God. Lament allows us to share our pain and our hurt with God and with safe people in our community. Now, I want to talk for a few minutes. We only got a few minutes, but I want to talk in these last few minutes about some practical tools for lament and for processing pain and grief. Kind of a simple lament process. And I don't know I'll get through it all, but all of these can stand alone. But here's what I want you to understand. In processing lament, in processing grief and pain, the first step in responding in a healthy way is to name our loss and to name our pain. For me, in my past, in my unhealthy life, in my addiction, when somebody told me after my divorce, you need to process the grief from your divorce. It didn't hurt me. She didn't hurt me. I denied the pain and I lied about the pain that I was experiencing. The first step in lament is to name our loss and to name what hurts and the pain that's present, to be honest about that. I lost my wife. I also lost my dreams. I told you my dream was growing old on the front porch swing with my wife and my grandkids playing around my feet. I lost that dream. I lost a lot. And we need to be able to name it and to name that that has hurt us and that it creates pain in our life. We have to be honest about the harm we've experienced, the pain that we are experiencing. Step one, name it. Be specific about it. Step two, we have to feel it. This is a hard one. We don't want to feel it. It hurts. It feels uncomfortable. Step two, in lament, feel it. Identify the emotion. Name the feeling. All right. I went through a divorce. I lost my wife. I lost my dreams. I lost my hope for the future. Identify the specific emotions and feelings that are present there. I'm feeling lonely. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling shame. I'm feeling hurt. Name those feelings. Some of you use a feelings wheel. I have a sheet that I hand out a lot, 8 core feelings. It comes from Chip Dodd Ministries. In fact, if you don't have a feelings wheel or you'd be interested in that 8 core feelings sheet, it lists the core feelings, 8 core feelings, and then the gift that's available if we process those feelings in a healthy way, and the impairment that's present when we don't process them in a healthy way. If you'd like a copy of a feelings wheel or you'd like a copy of those 8 core feelings, shoot me a message. And I'm going to say it's probably not best to shoot it to me here, because when I close this out, this may be gone. I don't know yet for sure how YouTube works. Shoot me an email, rwcoaching2@gmail.com, or you can go to my website, shoot me a message. Shoot me a message on YouTube or on Facebook. Just say, I'd like that feelings wheel. I'd like that 8 core feelings. We use these tools to identify specifically what we are feeling. Being specific is important. Identify the emotions. And we need to allow ourselves to experience that. We need to sit in it for a while. That means we don't rush to escape. We don't rush to suppress it or to numb it out. We need to feel the feeling. Number 3, say it out loud. All right. Now, what do I mean by that? What I'm talking about is out loud journaling or prayer. A lot of times it's good for us to speak it with our mouth. At the very least, we need to be writing these things down. When we speak those words out through our mouth or we write them down on a page of paper, that makes them clear in front of us. That's an acknowledgement, a clear acknowledgement on our part of what we're experiencing. In prayer, when we speak it out through prayer, we're confessing it to God. We're telling Him, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm experiencing. And we need to use honest language when we do that, in journaling, in prayer, in just speaking it out loud. We need to be honest enough to say things like, I don't understand why I'm going through this. Why is this happening to me? I don't see that I deserve it. I don't see that this is fair. I don't like this. I don't like it. This feels unfair. It's okay for us to say these things to ourselves, to say these things to God, and to say these things to other people who are safe. So say it, and say it out loud. And then the 4th step in our tools is to stay connected, to stay connected. Don't rush out there to try to fix it. Don't rush out there to try to resolve it. Don't leave. Stay connected. Stay connected with your feelings. Stay connected with your experience. Stay connected with other people. Most of us are familiar with that saying, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is, and everybody says together, healthy community. Healthy community. It's connection. So the 4-step lament practice. Name it. Name what you're feeling. This is what I've lost. This is what I'm experiencing. This is what hurts. Feel it. Allow yourself to sit in it. It's best to sit with someone, to allow somebody to share that with you. People, when I was in the ministry years ago, people always used to say, man, you're so good at hospital visits. I hate hospital visits. That's what other pastors would tell me. But everybody says you do such a good job. What's your secret? I said, there isn't any secret. I go into the hospital. I say hello. I say a prayer. And then I sit down and shut my mouth. And I just sit with them. I just sit with them. That's what we need. That's what I have to have, is somebody to just sit with me in my pain and in my feelings. Sometimes that's all that's needed. So we name it, we feel it, we say it, whether we're writing it down, whether we're saying it out loud, whether we're speaking it to God in prayer, and then we stay connected. Lament isn't about solving the pain. Lament is about not being alone in it. In fact, I shared there the book of Job, after Job has said all these things. This isn't fair. If God was here, I'd set him straight and tell him why it's not fair. And then God says Job is the only one who spoke the truth. But then God also said, you sit back and let me ask you some questions. Where were you when I formed the heavens and the earth, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you? And God really didn't give him any answers. But God was present with him. And Job left with a sense of God's presence. He didn't understand what had happened, but what he knew is that he wasn't alone. And often that's what we need the most, is to know that we're not alone in our pain and our suffering. Now, here's the thing. In tying all this together, we've had 2 weeks talking about grief, and now we've been talking about lament. We've named grief. We've given ourselves a definition for it. We have uncovered some hidden grief that takes place when we enter into recovery. And here in talking about lament, we've learned how to carry it. So here's what I want to leave you in my final thoughts on recovery, on lament. My final thoughts on lament is that we don't have to escape and run from our pain. What we can learn is that painful things happen in life. And what we need is to have a safe place to take that pain and to process it. All right, this has been our topic. Things have gone pretty well. Nothing's crashed and gone horribly wrong tonight. I've enjoyed the interaction on YouTube. This has been really good. I appreciate you guys being here. I've had people here on Facebook I'm really pleased with the way things have gone. I want to give you a heads up on next week. Next Tuesday, I'll be back here again, 8 Eastern Standard Time. And what we're going to talk about next week, we're going to talk about a specific issue, a specific type of addiction, and a specific issue. That our topic next week, our title next week is going to be safety over details. What really rebuilds trust after betrayal? And to let you know up front, a lot of the people that I work with are struggling with sex addiction and unhealthy sexual behavior. And what we're going to talk about specifically next week is going to deal with that. We're going to talk about how men respond often in betrayal when we betrayed our spouse, when we betrayed that person that we're in relationship with, how we respond to that sometimes in ways that in the beginning give us some relief, but causes intense pain for our loved one. After betrayal, most people think that telling everything, disclosing everything, getting everything out there is going to fix it. But what our spouse really is asking is one question. And that question is this: am I safe with you now? Is it safe to try to continue in a relationship? And we're going to take a look at that next week. May not apply to all of you, might be a good topic for you to listen to, be here for, even if it doesn't directly apply in your situation right now. So, next week, safety over details. What rebuilds trust after betrayal? That'll be our topic here next to Tuesday at 8 Central. Thank you for being here. If you'd like a copy of that feelings wheel or the 8 core feelings chart, shoot me a message. Facebook, YouTube, email rwcoaching2@gmail.com, or you can head to my website and contact me there, rw-coaching.com. All right. Thanks for being here, everybody. You made things go pretty smooth, and I've enjoyed the interaction in the comments. Have a good evening.